It is wonderful, Lavina, to welcome you back, and Kodja, to welcome you to Cape Town and the CTICC. I read a fascinating book by Mark Nazilla the other day talking about what AI looks like and in the continent and for the continent for the future. Where we're at now, what do you think? What do you think the future looks like for AI?
So I think it's extremely bright at this point in time. I've been here a couple of hours this morning. I've done a panel earlier on and then a wonderful fireside chat with Lavina. Many of the points I've made is the promise is very clear. Reports suggest that between now and 2030, the use of AI and the diffusion of AI could create $2.9 billion impact on GDP. That's almost doubling the continent's GDP. We've heard about some of the biggest companies, whether that be Vodacom on the continent, Google, or Microsoft, or indeed Meta, using AI and diffusing that to people to impact their lives already. As I've mentioned to a number of people in the audience, we have a booth outside with organizations like Jacaranda, Foodamate, Tanzania AI, Grit, who are using Meta's open source llama models to create real impact, to create models and applications that actually fit the challenges that we face on the continent. So when I look at things, I think extremely bright. Is there work to do on a policy and regulatory front? Do we need additional investment? Do we need more digital literacy training to help many of the millions, 1.2 billion people on the continent understand the promise of AI? Absolutely. But is the future bright? Undoubtedly.
Lavina, let's talk about some of the barriers too, that Kodja mentioned, the potential, but there are barriers to this, and what are the biggest ones, and how do we make sure that the message is loud enough and clear enough that those barriers perhaps are lessened?
The easy question. Thanks for that. So I think for me, unison voice is something that I think we could do a lot better in as a continent. In terms of where the gaps are, infrastructure we know skills, we know computation is starting to become quite a key narrative. But I also do think that we need to be able to understand what is that picture that we actually want to build for our Africa, yeah? Because we don't seem to kind of have that fully mapped out. And once we have that, I think all these different challenges, whether it's access to electricity or constant electricity, whether it's accessibility to the actual technology and affordability to those technologies, all of those things become quite easily solvable if we actually understand what is that global sort of narrative we actually want to be telling and sort of formulating for ourselves as a continent.
We think about these conversations happening in forums like this, but are they really happening, and that's great that they're happening in places like this, but are they happening in the places that they necessarily need to be happening? That education, that conversation, that dialogue?
So I think one of the things that we've been struck by, both Meta and the AU, and I know Lavina does so much work with not only the AU but ministers around the continent, is the consensus around the potential of AI. So one of the things that we're often challenged by, and there are some parts of the world who aren't as convinced about the problems of AI and whether to have the right kind of policy and regulation to enable AI in the way that we should. Is here when I speak to heads of state, when I speak to ministers, permanent secretaries, there is a understanding, whether that be rudimentary or full kind of technical knowledge, there is an understanding that this holds great promise in areas like agriculture, in governance in general, but areas like agriculture, areas like education, areas like health and energy. AI could create dramatic positive change, and that's helpful as a foundational point, a launch point to start any kind of conversation. So it's happening, and many governments are educated. Do we need to do more? Absolutely.
When people like yourselves are having the conversation, you refer to it when you're up here as the tough nut to crack. Do you have a time frame? Are you looking at a time frame of we hope that by X date this is the conversation that we're having, or this is the uptake?
So when I said tough nut to crack, the tough nut to crack wasn't so much this conversation about what we're having with policymakers. More the tough nut to crack, in my view, and I thought I stressed this, was with the most important people, the beneficiaries and users, this 1.2 billion people who could benefit from it. And I think that's a challenge. How do we get devices out there? How do we get AI into their hands? How do we get them to understand this could help my child learn? It could ensure that I deliver my baby more safely. It could ensure that I could harvest my crops with bumper yields. Getting everyone to understand that is super, super important.
No, he said it all. I mean, fully agreement. I think, the impact to use cases is where we're driving towards,
Yeah.
right? And the business model is actually changing for AI. It's no longer just revenue based, it's impact driven. And I think that's the important narrative for everyone. And I think that's where we're going to start seeing the actual scalability or the actual tangibility on ground to people.
They're really exciting conversations that we're having. We thank you, Kojo, and to you, Lavina. It's been wonderful to welcome you back to Africa Tech Festival. Please make sure that you're following the hashtag Africa Tech Festival 2024.